Welcome, witches, wizards, and muggles alike, to another enchanting episode of Magical Tales from the Slytherin Common Room, bringing your favorite Harry Potter fanfiction to audio format. So sit back, relax, and lock your headphones and let the magic begin.
Apostasy by Deydralinne. This chapter does have a trigger warning. The trigger warning is torture, murder, and self-mutilation. So, yeah, be mindful and skip ahead if you need to. Chapter 47, Give Them Hell. Hermione looked at the man she had once considered a mentor, a friend. How many lives could have been saved? How many souls? Had he just handed the power to her when he had the chance? Would she have become who she is now? She hoped so, because as egotistical as it may be, Hermione did like herself. His near black eyes had never looked back at her with such terror before. He had been wary of her for sure, but if he had ever been truly scared of her, he had hidden it well. Right now, however, his eyes showed every horrible truth. "Imperio," she whispered aloud, only so he would know that he would be forced to obey her commands, as he should have done willingly years ago. Kingsley was strong-willed, but he was, and always had been, weaker than her. That's why it didn't matter what he had done. She was always going to come out on top. Hermione reached for the chair and flipped it around, straddling it with her arms resting on the back. She was going to enjoy the show. She reached down and yanked the knife from the side of her boot, taking time to admire the delicate carvings on the blade. This knife had seen so much bloodshed, including her own on occasion. She handed Kingsley the knife. Behind her, Draco inhaled sharply in anxiousness. But she could feel the hold she had over Kingsley's mind. She knew they were safe and that Draco would be faster with a killing curse than Kingsley could be with a knife. For every year that you have let this war drag on unnecessarily for the sake of your pride, cut off one of your fingers. Hermione raised an eyebrow at him. Kingsley's hand shook, but he didn't have the strength to fight her control. He placed one hand on his leg, fingers spread out across his trunk of a thigh. His hand gripping the knife moved slowly towards the digits. Hermione raised an eyebrow, curiosity winning out. She still wasn't sure of when the prophecy had come to be, how long the wizard before her had known about it. Harry had claimed to know for at least a year, and Ron denied knowing of it at all when Ginny had questioned him. But Hermione could smell the lie on his skin. Kingsley gasped and cried out in agony as the glistening blade dug into his pinky finger. A line of thick red blood flowed out from beneath it and ribboned down his thigh. Most people expect bone to crunch or crack, and that is true for breaking a bone or crushing it. But when it's being sawed in half with a serrated blade, it sounds more like cutting wood. The man grit his teeth and squeezed his eyes closed, blocking out the sight of it, but Hermione couldn't look away. She didn't want him missing a single moment of this either. "Kingsley, look at your hand. Watch what you are doing." He started openly sobbing, but obeyed her command. Wines spilt from him as readily as the blood from his mangled finger. Hermione had hoped that she would find some kind of justice in this, some alleviation of dues owed, but the only thing she felt was curiosity. Curious how far she could push him. Curious how long he had used her in his games. Curious if his inevitable death would change a single thing in this world. A small snap sounded, bouncing off the walls as the bone broke all the way through. The small bloodied nub, mangled and raw as it was, exposed to the air, the useless finger rolling and falling to the ground. Kingsley, even through his cries, moved to grip the knife with his other hand and began all over again on his thumb. His wails louder, and the hilt of the knife pushed against the wound of his dominant hand. Hermione tilted her head as she pieced the action together. He would be unable to grip the knife if he had to remove all the phalanges on one hand and still had to remove more. So working on that assumption, he had known for over 6 years. That was before she had cast the first Avada. That was before she had become this corrupt monster they were trying to claim her to be now. What justifications had he told himself at the time then? That she was too young and lacked the experience to lead a country? How relieved he must have been when Ron reported that first killing. A small smile lifted the corners of her mouth ever so slightly. Oh, Kingsley, 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 she tutted with a shake of her head. You have been a bad boy, haven't you? Please, slipped through the fog in Kingsley's brain. Hermione leaned back with a shake of her head. The sawing motion continued, and slowly, one by one, the 5 fingers on that hand fell to the floor, followed immediately by the knife, which cluttered loudly against the blood-splattered tile. Kingsley made no attempt to quiet the wails falling from him as he stared down at his now useless hand. Hermione bent to retrieve the knife. The entire thing was sticky with his blood, the shiny silver now stained with the red liquid. Still warm beneath her fingertips, she let it dangle between her fingers, dripping the excess blood to the floor before wiping the remaining fluid on her jeans and putting it back into the side of her boot for now. Finette. Hermione waved her hand and the Imperious slipped back from his mind. Kingsley attempted to lurch forward, straining against the chains around his chest. You fucking bitch, he screamed. You fucking bitch. I should have killed you when I had the chance. His face contorted into a disgusted rage soaked from his tears. Hermione chuckled. Well, yeah, I mean, that much is obvious. Would have served you much better than the campaign you started against me. He shrugged casually. Her nonchalant response obviously was not what he was expecting. What the fuck happened to you? He sneered. Hermione launched her body forward to collide with the back of the chair again. You happened to me, Kingsley, she hissed. You, Harry, Ron, all of those fucking cunts in that house who went with the flow of the sewage pipe you created, swimming down it like it was a fucking river. Hermione could feel the magic tingling at her fingertips. She stood and kicked the chair toward him and began pacing the room in an attempt to calm her rage before she killed him prematurely. A few deep breaths and a roll of her shoulders had her feeling better. Draco's hand reached out and grabbed hers, pulling her into his embrace and wrapping his arms around her waist affectionately. You have this, love. Breathe. He peered down into her eyes with such confidence that she believed him. Behind her, Kingsley began a disbelieving laugh. The High Commander. Fucking a traitorous blood whore. Unbelievable. Draco's eyes turned to steel, bending down to pull the knife from her boot and striding toward the man with purpose, holding it up for the wizard to see before he yanked his head backwards. Draco, I'm not... Hermione's protest died on her lips as she watched Draco's hand squeeze Kingsley's jaw together, forcing his mouth open and pulling his tongue from within, slicing it off in one clean cut. A distorted warble of screams put an end to the silence once more. Blood spilt everywhere, all over Draco's hands, down Kingsley's neck, and all over the front of his shirt. Draco stabbed the blade into the man's thigh so deep that his skin hit the hilt. Talk about my girlfriend like that again, and she will have a hard job convincing me not to keep you alive and on the brink of death for the next 40 years. Warmth spread through Hermione's belly and cheeks. Even with Kingsley's blood all over him, he never failed to impress the shit out of her with his sex appeal. If anything, the blood only added fuel to the fire. Clearing her throat, she pushed that thought from her mind and tried to focus on the task at hand. Well, now how am I going to get him to talk? Hermione whined, feigning annoyance. Draco rolled his eyes. Oh, gee, I wonder if only there was someone here that knew a highly skilled legilimens. Hermione giggled. Oh, right, is Tom around? She teased, delighting when it pulled a feral growl from her boyfriend. Which, I swear, Draco sighed. Hermione watched as he pulled his bottom lip between his teeth. His eyes twinkled with the amusement of their teasing as they roamed her body. She knew he felt the same heat that she did. Well, stop fucking around then, Hermione challenged, turning around and walking to the table that Ginny had so kindly prepared for her. Ginny knew from the few times they had tortured Death Eaters secretly in the past that Hermione had a preference for mild to medium pain over a long-term time period. In the long term, the constantly changing but ever-present pain in her experience, which, granted, was limited, tended to be more effective than the high pain over a shorter period. Her eyes fell onto a wooden awl, and her face immediately broke out in a grin. The sounds Kingsley was making already sounded like music to her ears. Reluctantly, she would need to cauterize his tongue and fingers. Probably heal his thigh. She didn't want him passing out at all while they moved on to the next part of this interrogation. Draco, sensing her obvious annoyance at having to heal this man even a little bit, stepped in to take over. "Thank you," she smiled appreciatively, collecting her chair and getting herself set up by his hand with his fingers still remaining. The thought briefly crossed her mind to use the hand with all the fingers now removed, but that ran the risk of causing the man to pass out. Ready, she looked at Draco, who was already staring down at Kingsley with determination. A simple nod of his head was his only answer. Kingsley really did try to fight her as she collected one of his remaining fingers, but Draco's wand saw to it that his arm was immobilized quickly. "Now, Kingsley, I don't want you to be alarmed," she said in a sweet sing-song voice, "but this may burn just a little." She looked at him pointedly as she slid the awl underneath his nail and into the nail bed beneath it. Another roar of pain had her ears ringing. She waited a few minutes for it to subside. Draco dove into his mind. "Now, Kingsley, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to be a good boy and answer them properly in your mind. Do you understand?" When she was met with silence, she forcefully wiggled the awl needle under his nail bed, eliciting more cries of anguish. Draco snorted with laughter. "Sorry, love, that's my fault. I forgot he can't talk." His tone suggested that he had forgotten no such thing. Hermione smirked and ceased the movement. "I would like a list of all the other safe houses that you have access to and their locations," she stated, watching Draco for indicators of needing to loosen Kingsley up a little. He held up 2 fingers, waving her on. Hermione began to apply pressure in an upward motion. Kingsley's garbled scream cracked. His chest heaved while his whole body began to shake. He was being attacked on 2 fronts. Kingsley was a competent oculens. The question was, how competent? Would he be able to keep Draco out while also coping with her assaults? A sickening ripping sound indicated the lifting of his nail. Draco's slight shake of his head was simultaneously disappointing and impressive. Red blood had smeared over the ends of his fingers, as well as the metal of the awl. If Blaise was here, she knew he would be itching to clean the mess Kingsley had created so far. But she enjoyed it. The art that she had created so far was payment for all the time she had bled for him. She had had so few chances to fight anyone lately. There was a Muggle saying, "bleeding like a stuck pig," and by the end of today, she wanted to forever associate him with those words. Kingsley whispered a sound that vaguely sounded like "please," but given the sound was so distorted, she couldn't be sure. "Sorry, mate, did you say something?" Hermione asked with false friendliness. Draco flashed her a smirk. "He said, 'Please stop,'" he chuckled. "Oh, poor darling, it's probably really painful, isn't it?" Hermione soothed with a nod of her head while picking up the next finger, taking a second to memorize every detail of his face as she shoved the point in underneath the nail bed. Kingsley's mouth opened, and a wounded animal noise vibrated out of the back of his throat. "You know, this could end so much quicker if you just tell us what we want to know. You are going to die, Kings, no matter what. Whether you give us the answers now or in a week's time, you will die. How much torture you endure in the meantime is up to you." She didn't wait for Draco to encourage the movement. She began wiggling the awl to begin the process of separating the nail from the bed underneath. "Locations, Kingsley. Give us the safe houses." Draco scoffed in disbelief. Got them. Hermione pulled the awl out and smiled, patting the man's knee comfortingly. Draco stroked her hair and made his way to the door and began speaking to Pansy, who was waiting in the hallway outside. Thank you, Kingsley. I appreciate that it must have been a struggle for your pride for you to give up, but just think. You probably just had your torture time. Kingsley's eyes rounded and looked at her in panic. Oh, you didn't think I was done, did you? I mean, part of me wants to thank you for turning me into this, but the largest part of me just wants you to suffer for all the emotional turmoil you caused me. Do you know how much and how long I hated myself? How long I questioned my self-worth because of you? Because you allowed everyone to treat me like a pariah? Hermione rose from her chair and glided across to the tools laid out for her and placed the awl back gently. Her wand would do for this next part. More precise, less blood getting on her, cleaner cuts. I was hit in the face with a fucking crowbar, and you blamed me, Hermione hissed. She made her way over to Kingsley again and peered into his black eyes. Now, I want to start by apologizing. I'm afraid I have not yet had a chance to use this spell, so it might take a bit of practice. But I do appreciate you letting me learn on you. Did you know that skin is the largest human organ? Which means that when I peel it off, it's going to hurt like a bitch. Kingsley looked at her in fear. A screech of pain came roaring out of him as she pointed the tip of her wand at the skin just below his elbow. An incision as deep as his fascia, all the way through around his arm, brought back the ribbons of dark red blood streaming down his forearm and dripping to the tile below. She had to be careful. If she nicked one of his arteries, then it would be game over quicker than she wanted it to be. She jumped as his arms jerked involuntarily. Whoops! She smiled sweetly at him. Also, did you know that flaying is thought to have likely started with the ancient Assyrians of Mesopotamia? Hermione rattled off casually before flicking her wand, tearing all the skin below the cut clean away from his body. The disgusting ripping sound echoed around the room, and the scream that bounced off the walls did feel like the justice she had been seeking earlier. She would be able to move on and leave this unfortunate period of her life behind her.